Every Tuesday without fail, Ernest Miles arrived at Carter's Diner by 7 a.m. The streets of downtown Greenwood Springs were still wet from the night's drizzle. Morning fog hung low, coiling around the lampposts like a memory refusing to let go. Ernest's steps were slow, deliberate. He wore the same navy blue peacoat he'd worn every winter for the past 20 years. Its fabric had faded to a soft steel gray at the shoulders, and one pocket had been stitched closed by hand. His cap, a knit one, folded neatly at the edge, hugged silver hair that hadn't seen a barber in months. He always chose the same seat far booth near the window. It gave him a view of the street, but kept him out of the way. There he could observe the city slowly wake up without having to be part of its noise. He folded his hands together on the table, resting them atop a cracked leather wallet, and waited not for food but for the silence to settle. "Morning, Mr. Miles," Janice called from behind the counter. Janice was quick on her feet, never without her apron and never short of opinions. She was in her early 40s, eyes, sharp voice, brisk but always softened when it came to Ernest. She didn't wait for a reply. She already knew the order. Black coffee, scrambled eggs, rye toast, not too burnt, and half a grapefruit. Ernest responded with a small nod. That was his way. The diner itself, Carter's, wasn't much to look at. The sign out front had long since lost its R, now reading Kate's to anyone new. But locals knew better. The stools at the counter wobbled. The booths were a mix of vinyl colors, none matching. Coffee came in chipped white mugs, each one with a different kind of wear. Still, it was the kind of place where people came to feel normal. Nurses from the overnight shift, delivery drivers needing warmth, retirees catching up over eggs and quiet. Most of them barely noticed Ernest. The ones who did, they whispered. "Dude looks like he walked out of a war movie." A teenager at the counter laughed. His friends snorted. "More like a history museum." Neither noticed Janice pause at the sound, but Ernest heard. He always did. He didn't react, didn't flinch. His dignity wasn't the kind that demanded attention. It was the kind that endured. Behind the counter, tucked next to the register, was a cracked Polaroid in a dollar store frame. It showed a younger Ernest standing tall in full navy dress blues. His back was straight. His eyes were the same dark, clear, steady. Few people looked at it. Fewer asked. But every Tuesday, Janice glanced at it while she poured his coffee and said, "Just loud enough. They don't know who you are, Mr. Miles. But I do." That Tuesday started like all the others until it didn't. At 7:43 a.m., the door creaked open. A gust of cold air swept through the diner, pulling with it the scent of wet pavement and diesel fumes. Two men entered wearing dark blue uniforms and the kind of expressions that didn't apologize. Officer Webb came first, short, blocky build clipboard under his arm like it was more dangerous than a gun. Behind him, Officer Coleman, taller, leaner, with a clenched jaw that looked like it had never known how to soften. They didn't smile, didn't greet anyone, just stood near the doorway, eyes scanning like searchlights. "Morning, officers," Janice said, trying to keep her tone light. "You two looking for coffee or trouble?" They ignored the question. Coleman's eyes locked on Ernest. "Sir," he said, voice clipped. "Mind answering a few questions?" Ernest lifted his coffee, took a slow sip, then set the mug down. He met Coleman's gaze evenly. "Am I being detained?" Webb took a step closer. "You a paying customer," Janice's voice snapped before she could stop it. "He's here every week, pays cash, eats quiet, never once caused a problem." "We didn't ask you," Coleman snapped. He didn't look at her. His eyes stayed on Ernest. "Sir, do you have proof of purchase?" Ernest reached slowly into his coat pocket. The movement was deliberate, aged. He withdrew a folded paper receipt and slid it forward. "Got anything with ID?" Webb asked. Ernest nodded once, removed a worn wallet, and produced a Veterans Affairs card. The plastic was scratched. His name, Ernest Miles, still clear beneath a faded emblem. Webb squinted. "You homeless? I don't have a permanent address," Ernest answered. "That's exactly what we're asking." Janice stepped from behind the counter. Her apron was creased, hands trembling slightly. "He's a Navy vet. Served longer than either of you have worn those badges." Webb's lip curled. That right, Coleman crossed his arms. "Funny how many folks like to play soldier when it's convenient." Ernest didn't speak. "Do you have a driver's license?" Coleman pushed. "Something with an address." This time, Ernest reached into the inside of his coat. The fabric creaked. From a pocket stitched closed, he tugged out a second wallet, older, cracked nearly in half. He opened it and laid it flat on the table. Three things sat inside a photograph, three men in uniform standing in sand. A worn commendation, crease torn at the edges. A small cloth scrap embroidered USS Carl Vinson, 1968. Coleman frowned. What is this? Ernest's eyes were clear. Proof. Not of address, of purpose. Webb scoffed. You carrying around war stories like that means anything now. Ernest's voice stayed soft. It means everything to the ones who didn't come home. The diner had gone quiet. Forks paused. Coffee cooled. Even the griddle's hiss sounded distant. Then Ernest did something no one expected. He reached once more into that stitched pocket. This time he pulled out a phone, a flip phone scratched and ancient. Coleman stiffened. Who you calling? Ernest didn't answer. He flipped it open, pressed a single button and lifted it to his ear. A pause. Then it's happening again. He closed the phone, laid it down beside his wallet, and met Coleman's gaze. The air shifted. You said you were doing your job, Ernest said. Now I'm doing mine. Then with slow precision, he picked up his fork and took a bite of his eggs, and whispered just loud enough for Coleman to hear, You won't forget me after this. The door didn't creak this time. It slammed open hard. So hard the bell didn't jingle. It clanged sharp and metallic like the start of something official. He wasn't wearing a uniform, no badge, no firearm, but his presence landed like a gavel. The man was tall, pale, early 40s, with a precision haircut and a navy blue overcoat pressed to perfection. His shoes clicked once against the old tile floor as he crossed the diner. He moved straight toward booth 5, straight toward Ernest. From his inner pocket, he produced a black leather case and flipped it open without a word. Mark Sorrell, he said evenly, Assistant Director, Department of the Navy, Office of Inspector General. Officer Coleman, who had up until then stood like a granite statue, didn't move. Webb opened his mouth, closed it again. Sorrell's voice was calm but sharp as cold steel. I'll need your badge numbers. We were just responding to a call, Webb began. There was no call, Sorrell interrupted. Your body cams were triggered at 7:43 a.m. Based on keyword dispatch, monitoring your full interaction with Mr. Miles was flagged, recorded, and reviewed, including the moment you questioned a veteran's right to exist in a public establishment. Silence. Outside, a city bus exhaled against the curb. Inside, you could hear the breath catch in Janice's throat. Mr. Ernest Miles served this country for over 22 years, Sorrell continued. Decorated engineer rescue technician, recipient of the Navy Cross. He completed classified extractions in the Persian Gulf under fire. He is to be treated with the same level of respect as anyone who wears a uniform past or present. Webb muttered, We didn't know who he was. You shouldn't have to, Sorrell said colder now. That's the point. Ernest hadn't said a word since Sorrell arrived. He didn't look triumphant. If anything, he looked tired the way old walls grow tired from holding up too much for too long. Mr. Miles, Sorrell said, turning slightly. Are you all right? Ernest gave a single nod. Didn't want to bother you. You didn't, Sorrell replied. They did. Carter, the owner, stepped out from the kitchen. His apron was dusted with flour, hands still damp. Is this over? Sorrell's jaw relaxed just a bit. For now. But there will be follow-up. Coleman stiffened. With respect, sir. You're not my subordinate, Sorrell said. You're my investigation. The sentence cracked through the air like a thunderclap. Then Sorrell leaned slightly closer to Ernest, voice lowered. You didn't have to call, but you were right to. Ernest finally spoke. It happens more than it should. The truth of that sentence sat with everyone differently. Janice stepped back behind the counter, wiping her eyes. Carter stood near the coffee machine, polishing a mug already clean, and yet no one left. Not even the teenagers who had once laughed. They stayed, watching. Then the bell above the door jingled again, soft this time. A teenage girl entered. Hoodie too large, sneakers too loud. She looked down at her phone, then up at Ernest. You him? She asked. He blinked. Excuse me. You're the guy from the video. The vet at Carter's. Sorrell raised an eyebrow. Video? The girl turned her screen toward them. There, frozen in a still frame, was Ernest, mid-sentence, phone in hand. Sorrell just entering behind him. It's everywhere, she said. TikTok, Instagram, Twitter. Somebody leaked the body cam footage. You're trending. Ernest stared at the image. You didn't post it, she added quickly. We know. Probably came from dispatch or a cop. Doesn't matter. People are mad. Like, really mad. How many? Sorrel asked. Last I checked, 600,000 views. 40,000 comments. Hashtags already moving. Dr. Ernest M. Some folks are calling you the quiet vet. Janice gasped. You're kidding. I'm not, the girl said. BuzzFeed wrote something. There's even a fan edit on YouTube, with dramatic piano music. Ernest closed his eyes, weary. I didn't want all this. The girl paused, then softened. Yeah, well, maybe it's not about what you wanted. Maybe it's about what we needed. She didn't stay. Didn't ask for a selfie. Just left the truth behind like a letter on the table. When the door shut behind her, Sorrel looked across the booth. You all right? Ernest rubbed his hands over his face. They're seeing a moment. Not the man. Janice reappeared with the coffee pot. Her eyes were red but fierce. She refilled his cup without asking. She's right, though, she said quietly. You're everywhere. People are paying attention. I didn't ask for that. No, she said. But maybe you gave something people didn't know they were missing. Just then, Carter walked over carrying a small cardboard box. Somebody from the VA center dropped this off for you, he said. Didn't say much. Ernest opened it slowly. Inside, a clean button-down shirt, a pair of new boots, a prepaid flip phone still sealed in its box, a note in neat handwriting. Thank you, Sergeant Miles. He stared down, not speaking. Sorrel reached into his coat and produced a small manila envelope. One more thing, he said. Ernest opened it. Inside was a formal military citation, thick parchment ribbon top. Your Silver Star, Sorrel explained. Filed in 1989. Lost in clerical limbo until someone finally found it. I thought about mailing it, but this felt right. Ernest stared at it. Not with pride, just stillness. This isn't an apology, Sorrel said. It's a correction. Ernest nodded and folded it carefully, placing it next to his plate. Truth doesn't expire, he whispered. Janice blinked hard and turned away. At that moment, the air in Carter's felt different. Outside, cars passed. Inside, life returned in small breaths. People weren't just looking at Ernest anymore. They saw him, not as an old man in a worn coat, but as someone who had stayed seated long enough for the world to finally wake up. By Thursday morning, Greenwood Springs was different. The diner still smelled like burnt toast and bacon grease. The coffee still hissed on the warmer. But the silence in Carter's was no longer dismissive, it was reverent. Ernest arrived just after sunrise like always. Same pea coat, same steady steps. Same booth in the corner, except the booth wasn't empty. He stopped at the edge of the table. There on the dark laminate surface sat a single white plate eggs rye toast, half a grapefruit. Next to it, a folded American flag, sharp and neat, the kind used in military funerals. In front of that stood a polished oak plaque with carved black letters. This seat belongs to Ernest Miles. He never asked to be seen. We just finally opened our eyes. No one said a word. No one clapped. But every customer in the diner stood as he entered, contractors in dusty boots, nurses fresh off shift, teens with AirPods half in. They all rose. Some placed hands over their hearts, a few wiped tears. Most just stood in quiet, awkward dignity. People not used to ceremony, but willing to try for a man who had once been invisible. Carter nodded from behind the counter. Your booth's ready. Ernest took it in. Every detail. The toast wasn't burnt. He didn't speak. He walked to the table, laid one weathered hand gently on the folded flag, then turned to the room and offered a single nod, slow, solemn enough. The room exhaled. Slowly, people sat down again. Forks clinked gently. Conversation resumed, but softer now, more mindful, like they were afraid to break the spell. It wasn't a parade, it wasn't on television, but it mattered, and in its quiet way it thundered louder than any brass band. Sorrel returned mid-morning. No suit this time, no badge, just a Navy windbreaker and a weary smile. Mind if I join? He asked. Ernest gestured toward the seat across from him. Coffee's still bad. I was counting on it. Janice brought a fresh pot without needing to be asked. She poured for them both, then set down a cinnamon muffin, something Ernest hadn't ordered in years. On the house, she said softly, then disappeared before either man could argue. You've had quite a week, Sorrel said, stirring in a packet of sugar. Didn't ask for it. I know, but you didn't run from it either. Outside the diner, traffic passed, but parked just down the block was a local news van idling quietly. Across the street, a group of college students had started sketching the diner's window with charcoal pencils on large art pads. You see the mayor's press conference, Sorrel asked. I turned off the TV. She offered you the key to the city. I offered her my breakfast bill. Sorrel chuckled, then reached into his pocket. Letters came in. Hundreds. I don't want them. You might want this one. He passed over a small white envelope, neatly addressed in cursive. Ernest opened it slowly. Inside was a single sheet handwritten. Dear Mr. Miles, my father served in the same fleet as you. When he saw the video, he cried for the first time in my life. He said he wore his cap again because of you. Thank you for making him proud. Thank you for sitting still when so many of us wouldn't have known how. With respect, Marissa L., age 27, St. Paul, Minnesota. Ernest read it once, then again, then folded it carefully and placed it in his wallet opposite the old photo of the three sailors in the sand. Sorrel leaned back. You've been offered a rent-free apartment uptown, a community service award, and a scholarship fund in your name. You turned them all down. I didn't sit in that booth to earn anything, Ernest said. I sat there because I didn't want to be erased. And now, maybe I'm remembered. That's enough. That afternoon, Carter added a new sign just beneath the plaque at Booth 5, reserved for those we forgot, until they reminded us. It was quiet in the way old truths are quiet, undeniable, heavy, and sacred. That night, someone left a small bouquet of white carnations at the booth. The next morning, a middle school civics teacher brought her students by to see what quiet courage looks like. They didn't speak, just looked. One of them cried. Sorrel came less often after that, but when he did, he never had to ask where Ernest was. The town had changed, not loudly, not instantly, but it had. People now looked at the man in the worn coat differently. Strangers paused to shake his hand. A mural began to form on the brick wall beside the diner, a silhouette of Booth 5 flag, folded sunlight streaming through the window. The artist refused to sign it. This one's for everyone who thought they were invisible, she said. By Friday, the hashtag #NarJurtErnestem had crossed 2 million shares. News outlets stopped calling, but the world kept watching. And Ernest kept showing up, same coat, same hat, same seat. Still quiet, still unshaken. The Sunday after it all began dawned softly. Light filtered through the diner's windows, catching in the floating dust, like golden confetti from a celebration no one planned. The bell over the door rang gently at 6:58 a.m., but this time it wasn't Ernest. Carter's opened like always. Janice brewed the first pot of coffee, humming under her breath. A few regulars came in, Mr. Delgado from the hardware store, Nurse Lisa, just off a 12-hour shift, a pair of retired mechanics who always ordered pancakes and argued about football. But Booth 5 remained untouched. There was no plate of eggs, no steaming mug, no folded pea coat hanging on the booth's corner. Instead, there sat the same oak plaque, the polished white plate with his usual order, and the folded flag. Resting beside it was a fresh copy of the Sunday Greenwood Sentinel. The headline read, "A Veteran's Silence That Spoke Volumes." At 7:15, the bell jingled again. A boy no more than 10 stepped inside holding his mother's hand. He paused at the entrance wide-eyed. His shoes squeaked against the tile. His mother knelt beside him and whispered something in his ear. He nodded solemnly, walked to the booth, and placed a folded sheet of notebook paper beside the flag. Then he turned and left. Janice moved toward the table, wiping her hands on her apron. She picked up the note carefully, her eyes already stinging, before she read the first word. Dear Mr. Miles, my grandpa said you made him proud to wear his hat again. He said you made people remember. Thank you for being brave even when no one saw you. Love, Aaron. She folded the note gently and tucked it beneath the plaque. Later that afternoon, Carter added another line to the sign at Booth 5. This seat is never empty, not anymore. No one had planned a memorial. There were no speeches, no public announcements. Yet people came, quietly, constantly, like they were drawn to something they couldn't name. Some left coins, military challenge, coins, shiny quarters, even old dog tags. Others brought flowers or framed photos of their own veterans. A pair of teenage girls left a small, hand-drawn portrait of Ernest done in pencil, showing his calm gaze through the diner window. Most left nothing at all, only silence and sometimes tears. It became a pilgrimage of sorts. Teachers brought their classes. Retirees came with folded newspapers. College students paused during their walks to place their hands on the booth's edge, as if grounding themselves in something deeper than the news cycle. One woman dressed in a sharp navy blazer and heels visited just before closing on a rainy Tuesday. She didn't say her name. She didn't order food. She simply stood before the booth, saluted with practiced precision, and whispered, "Fair winds, Chief." And then she was gone. Janice, once quick with sarcasm, now moved a little slower around booth 5. Her jokes were still sharp, but she carried herself differently, like someone who knew she'd once overlooked something too important to forget again. Carter replaced the glass on the front door. The new one bore a small inscription etched near the bottom, "Welcome, especially if you think you're forgotten." One morning, a journalist from Stars and Stripes asked Janice if she'd ever imagined the world would change because of a man in a corner booth. She looked him dead in the eye and said, "He didn't change the world. He reminded it." At the VA Center across town, a new mentorship program launched in Ernest's name, the Miles Initiative. Its mission was simple: pair younger veterans with older ones, not just for support, but to remind the world that silence doesn't mean absence, that dignity doesn't need applause. The mural on the brick wall beside the diner grew larger each day. The artist, a local woman named Michelle, never accepted payment. She said she'd spent most of her adult life forgetting her father's military service. But after seeing Ernest's story, she remembered everything and picked up her brush for the first time in years. The mural showed a shadowed silhouette of a man sitting at a diner booth, sunlight streaming through the window, flag folded on the table. Across the top, painted in deep navy script, "He stayed seated so others could stand tall." By summer, Greenwood Springs passed a city ordinance formally recognizing Booth 5 as a cultural landmark. It became the smallest official memorial in the state, just a table, a flag, and a folded newspaper, but also one of the most visited. Ernest Miles never asked for any of it. He didn't live to see all of it, but his seat was never empty again. And more importantly, neither were the people who sat there afterward, because they sat knowing someone had once refused to disappear. Someone had once chosen to stay.